Hi, welcome to this week's edition of PHQ, questions from the personality hacker community. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And Addison, let's get right to our question today.
Hi, Joel and Antonia. I had a question about types in children. I'm an INFP, but my introversion only became evident when I entered school. My mom was actually surprised when the teacher said how quiet I was. I was very spirited at home, maybe because I was comfortable and could just be myself. Is this common with kids? I noticed my own daughter, who is 3, is very spirited in a similar way, but I hesitate to say she's an extrovert because I know my experience was not what it appeared. Maybe I'm not as introverted as I thought. How would this affect my type? Andrea.
Thanks, Andrea, for the question. So the first thing that comes to my mind is my son, Sawyer, who's 7 years old right now at the time of this recording. Our guess, again, for kids, it's hard to tell, especially when they're younger. Our guess is he's probably most likely an ESTJ. He's exhibiting behaviors of that. He is the loudest person, the most outgoing, loudest person I have ever met in my entire... Now, I'm married to Antonia, by the way, who can definitely be loud and talk a lot, right? And my son Sawyer beats out her like 10 times. He beats out our little 3-year-old Piper, who's extremely loud. He is just out there. He's outgoing. He's loud. He doesn't have a sense of... You're looking at me really weird.
No, I was just going to add, he makes my eardrums explode.
Oh yeah. He's definitely a boisterous kid. And I went to his classroom last year, and I kept having to check in to make sure he was still in the room when I was in his school. I would look around and I'm like, I don't hear or see Sawyer's energy anywhere. I mean, this kid is off the chart. I was in the middle of a funeral for one of my great uncles. And he just has no sense of being quiet at all. Like during the funeral service, he's like, "Dad, can I blah, blah," real loud out. I'm like, Sawyer, you've got to whisper. We're inside. We're at a funeral. He has no sense of being quiet. And yet in a classroom situation, he doesn't move. He doesn't talk. His energy is very contained. The teacher has to like extract things from him. In fact, his mom talks about the teacher talking to him about he won't raise his hand and speak up in class to the point where the teacher doesn't think he's on the same page as everyone else. She's like, I think he might be falling behind. And we're both like, no, he's just being quiet. So I think it's really, I think kids show up differently, obviously, in their context. For him, for some reason in school, he is the exact opposite of every other context, even funerals in his life. And it's weird how school does that to him. So I think that's, from my experience, I resonate with what you're saying because I've seen such a drastic difference in my own son.
Different situations and contexts bring out different parts of who we are. Even as adults, we will show up differently depending upon our context. There are certain... when we're on the podcast, I don't think people would think that... I mean, they probably think that I was the talky one between the two of us because I have a tendency to monologue. I don't think people would think I'm the quote-unquote loud one between you and I, Joel, because you bring more energy to the podcast than I do. The podcast is a context in which I feel like I need to be careful. I need to be thoughtful, mindful. So I bring a more reserved energy, I think, to the podcast. I mean, some podcasts you can hear me start being my more natural self where I'll get really revved up. In day-to-day life, I'm a lot more energetically projective, I think, than I am usually in the podcast, probably. But that's because the podcast brings out a more balanced, probably like TI or accuracy part of who I am. And so I tend to be a little bit more sort of, thoughtful about what I'm saying because I know this is being recorded. In a situation where I feel totally outgunned, like anything that's bringing up my 3-year-old of memory or introverted sensing, man, I'll be either like... Actually, I'll either behave like a child, like a little kid that doesn't know what's going on, or I'll behave like an aggressive person who hates being there. And I'm just, I'm like, damn the man. And I'm being all anarchistic in that context. And you'll see this happen at the post office and or DMV. And so it's really interesting how different situations bring up different parts of our personality, which I think is why it's so important to understand our cognitive function sets. Our cognitive functions are the tools we have in our toolbox that we're going to grab based on what tool we think is the best tool for the job in the situation. Your son Sawyer believes that at school, introverted sensing or memory, which would be, if he's an ESTJ, that would be his co-pilot process or auxiliary process if you're looking at the technical terms. that's the tool he thinks is the appropriate tool for the job when he's at school. And he's not wrong, right? That's his learning process. It's a lot of rote memorization in school. So he has, as a little ESTJ, he's figured out, I think the right tool for the job here in school is for me to bring my introverted sensing. This is my learning process. This is the process that helps me learn through rote and through observing things and integrating, basically what I've experienced on a day-to-day basis. And so his instinctive little mind is pulling the right tool for the job, but that means he's going to show up as an introvert at school. So I think all of us do this. I think that's why there's a danger in self-typing and typing others based on a single context. If you only look at one context, you're not going to get the full scope of the person. So it's about trends. It's about observing us over time. It's about figuring out which tools we're grabbing, which are the cognitive function tools we're grabbing, and we're probably going to grab the ones that are in our cognitive function stack, or what we call the passengers in your car, in the car model. So what are the tools we're grabbing? And if we can observe the different styles of tools that we're grabbing and then figure out which configuration we're doing that in, that's a much better predictor of our personality type than just looking at the 4 dichotomies of introvert, extrovert, sensing, intuition, thinking, feeling, and judging, perceiving. Because we all have access to all of them. What's our go-to tool in our toolbox? What are the ones that we're most grabbing? What's the ones that we enjoy using the most? And what are the ones that we have a natural strength for, and which ones are the ones that are tripping us up and we have a kind of a natural weakness towards? So I think that's why the function stack is so much better a predictor of our type than just looking at the dichotomies.
Yeah, and Andrea, if you're an INFP, you would be leading with a process we've nicknamed called authenticity. Your co-pilot would be a process we've nicknamed exploration. And exploration is a very externally focused, it's an extroverted process. You're pushing buttons in the outside world. If you're at home during the day as a child, you're going to be engaged with the world in a button pushing fashion. You're exploring, you're learning, you're bombastic probably. And then you get into a school context, and it puts you back more into an introverted state, most likely, because you're required to sit there quietly and learn. And it probably puts you into your tertiary or your 10-year-old process, which we've nicknamed memory. And memory is all about, again, really inputting quietly. It's about the impressions over time. It's about learning through rote memorization, through standardization, through understanding how history impacts us. And so, again, I don't know your individual experience, but most likely school puts you into a context where you were accessing part of your personality that was more quiet, was more introverted. And when you're at home, you probably had more freedom of expression. And so you were able to get more extroverted, to explore the part of your personality that was all about expressing yourself, pushing buttons in the outside world, and seeing what happened with the people and the objects around you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't hear you specifically use this phrase, but I think it's clear that our feelings of being safe will also, that's a major component in how we show up in each context. Like, if we feel safe, we're going to be more personally expressive. We're going to feel like it's okay to show up as quote unquote ourselves. And if we don't feel safe, we're going to definitely go into a more reticent, observational, vigilant space, which will look a little different depending upon our type. And also, I don't think school necessarily makes everybody feel safe. I think most of us enter an introverted sensing space in school because that's what school is designed around. That's the infrastructure of school. Sit down, be quiet at your desk, try to learn through memorization if at all possible, especially elementary school. And, if it's public school and not like a charter school or something to that effect. So I think most of us go to an introverted sensing space. And you can tell the kids that can't do that don't have enough introverted sensing to pull from, the little extroverted, sensing people, like the little ESPs, ESTPs, ESFPs, if they don't have enough of that training, maybe their parents aren't using introverted sensing, and so they don't have enough training at home to really pick up on how that works, they're going to have a harder time showing up at school that way. And then those are the kids that get called ADD, right? Because they're just learning through something completely different. And introverted sensing is not part of their lexicon. That's not a cognitive function they pull from very often. Or the little INFPs, right? That have introverted sensing as their inferior process, or what we call memory as their 3-year-old. A lot of times they get called ADD because they just don't have access to that. Whereas school brings out introverted sensing or memory in us quite often. So school is like a difficult place to really type kids. I think also one of the dangers of using school as a typology field or how we're showing up is school requires of us to be different than, the peer pressure, the, punishment for not, being like other people. That's definitely something that you see come up in school over and over again. And that's one of the reasons why, we've got this statistic that 50 or 75% of the population is extroverted and 25% of the population is introverted. And I hear that statistic being repeated over and over again. Well, the reason why that statistic shows up that way is because David Kiersey, who was the writer of Please Understand Me, he did a study of kids in high school. And that was where he picked up that those statistics. Well, high school is the most extroverted time period in a kid's life, and there's a lot of social pressure to show up in an extroverted manner. So you're going to see that there's going to be a statistical anomaly in high school versus other places where we feel a lot more permission to be an introvert as opposed to an extrovert. And so, just anytime you're using school is a very synthetic context. It's very manufactured. School is not a representation of how we show up at any other place in reality, right? Yeah. We're super peer focused in school. What other time period in history, or like in any other time period in your life, not in history, but any other time period in your life where all you do is engage with people of your exact same age?
Yeah, it doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen.
When you're an adult, this is not the case at all.
Right. There's no other situation where you are that peer focused. There's no other situation where peer pressure comes in at the levels that it does at, in junior high and in high school. There's no other time period where you're going to have to sit down and shut up and learn your ABCs and 1, 2, 3s like you do in elementary school.
Or learn just the functional procedures of when you go to the bathroom, when you go to the drinking fountain. There's a bell that rings every 45 to 50 minutes. You stand up like a herd of cattle and move from one room to another as a group. This is not a representation of the real world. That is very synthetically created. So I agree with you. It's a difficult place to look at how someone's actually showing up. It'd be like trying to understand an animal in the zoo and say, well, this is how an animal behaves in the wild, when a zoo is a synthetic environment. School is a synthetic environment for people. So I think there's a challenge in that from a personality standpoint.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor. That's a really good metaphor. When reality is painted on the walls, you're not really going to get people showing up as their authentic, true self. So it's tough to type kids based on how they're showing up in a school environment. And that said, it's still just tough to type kids. It really is, just in general. So I think the best we can do, you and I, we do this all the time. And we think your 7-year-old, right, the one you were mentioning before, Sawyer, we think he's an ESTJ, but we always, he's 7, right? He could show up as a completely different type later on. That seems to be the trend right now. That seems to be how he's showing up in most contexts. And also, we could be completely full of it. When he was 4, we thought he was an ISFJ because he showed up so introverted when he was 4 years old. So, you just kind of hold it loosely. Really type starts to truly show up for somebody when they're a teenager, but not necessarily a teenager in school, right? Like how they're showing up in general. I think that gets a lot more clear. And by the time you're 25, that's when your mind is fully formed, right? I think around the age of 25 is when your brain stops developing at the level it does in childhood. So if you're confused about the type of a kid based on how he's showing up in school, or just because he's young or she is young, then that's normal. That's normal.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew, for the question. Hopefully that was helpful as an answer. And if you've got a question, you've been listening and you've got a question that you'd like to ask us, you can go over to personalityhacker.com/questions. There's a form there you can fill out. Or the preferred way is to record your question using a service we have there. You can actually record your voice through the computer, and we can edit it directly into the PHQs for each week, and we can answer those live on the air.
What's that link? I think a couple of people have mentioned that they're having trouble finding that on the website.
Personalityhacker.com/questions. Personalityhacker.com/questions. You can also come over to our Facebook page, facebook.com/personalityhacker, twitter.com/personalityhack, HACK, and subscribe to this podcast. Click the little subscribe button in iTunes or whatever Android platform you're listening on. We'd love for you to be a part of our main podcast every week, and also these PHQs, these questions from the community. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This has been this week's PHQ questions from the Personality Hacker community. We'll talk to you on the next episode.